there's a lot of discomfort over the what is seen as absolute power given to the state in collecting data, storing data, and even using it for purposes that it may deem fit. How do you ensure? If you look at other countries, they have measures to curtail the powers of the government in this respect.
Raghuvir, I'll be very blunt on this. I think a lot of this discourse on free speech, in a sense, curbing the state's rights, and this has happened now recently, even in the rules, IT rules relating to fact checking. Yeah, I think and I say this with the greatest of respect, is either a misunderstanding, and I'm being very polite here because I have to be polite because it's election season and I'm a minister, but it is really a misunderstanding, misreading, or an over-invested enthusiasm in a narrative that the government is here to infringe on people's rights and grab control of data. Nothing is further from the truth. The governments always have lawful legal rights to intercept. It has been something that is in the Government of India statute book for many, many years. It is true for all democracies in the world. And same is the case for the data domain, where the DPDP Bill has carved out specific exceptional circumstances, which is law and order, which includes terrorism, investigation, emergency situations like natural disasters, and the pandemic, health kind of situation, which is now our eyes are open to after COVID. That in these occasions, the government has the right to access personal data without seeking consent. This is the only very clearly carved out exception that is given to the government. And I will say this again for those who have not understood, that despite that, the government's obligations to store that data without breaching is still intact. So while the government can access data during a law and order emergency or a pandemic or a natural disaster, because I can't come to you during a natural disaster and say, please give me your consent, I need your data as a government to give you the... So those have been carved out. But even then, when I as a government take your data, I am under the obligation not to breach it, not to share it, not to otherwise distribute that data. The right to data protection of yours remains absolutely unambiguously intact, regardless of whether there are emergency situations of the government. This bill is an absolutely clear bill, like I said, that A, protects the citizens' rights, B, does not create increased compliance burden on the innovation ecosystem vis-a-vis data, and third, carves out with exceptional clarity what are the emergent situations under which the government can access personal data, and the obligation remains on the government that they will not be able to, even if then they collect the data, to be able to distribute that. They have a right and obligation, continuing right and obligation under the Act to protect that data.
I have a couple of supplementary questions based on that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. It's not only for national security purposes or for natural disasters, also for delivering citizen services.
No. That is a separate issue. I'll tell you why. What that means is, if I as a government department today, let us say MeitY, has come to you, got your consent and got your information as a citizen for delivering some service. Within the government, there is no need to seek your consent again and again if you apply for PM Awas, PM Ayushman, PM Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So within the government, a consent once given to the government is deemed to be a government-wide consent. That is all. And it's very clear, all it does is reduce the headache for a citizen who is dealing with the government with multiple ministries to constantly have to give consent and reconsent, that the consent form that the government will give to the citizen will say, this data that we are seeking from you to deliver a particular service is a consent that will be used by the government to also deliver other government services. But again, I say to you that regardless of which department of the government collects the data for delivering which service, the obligation on the government department to protect that data is absolutely unambiguously intact.
Perfect. But we all know, I mean, I take that as absolute, that the data will be protected. There could be others in this room who may question, saying data leaks are possible despite your best efforts.
Yeah. And so therefore, if the data is breached, whether it is by a government or a private company that is collecting the data, that is where the Data Protection Board comes in and gives these punitive financial penalties. It will be absolutely under the bill, not worth the while for any entity that is in the business of collecting data or collects data to breach its obligation to protect the data. It will be very expensive, it will be very punitive, and it could be as much as 50 crores to 60 crores per breached instance of data. So, for example, if there is anybody here today who's in the data business and they collect the data and they say, I have breached a database of 1,000 entries, it could be 50 crores times 1,000. I mean, the Data Protection Board can interpret it. So this is not at all about don't do it again, tap on your wrist. This is meant to be punitive. The Data Protection Board's powers are to determine findings in the event of a breach and impose penalties that are meant to be punitive, that are meant to make people behave properly. This whole bill, Raghuvir, is going to create a behavioral change. It is designed to create a behavioral change within those entities that are today dealing with personal data of Indian citizens.